Thanks so much for tuning in to Reversing Climate Change. I'm the host, Ross Kenyon. We have two sponsors right now, Rainbow and Philip Lee LLP. If you give me a couple minutes, I'll tell you about why they are very relevant to your interests. So listen up. If you follow me on Substack or LinkedIn, you've probably seen me write for Rainbow recently. They have a very idiosyncratic approach to how science is commercialized and how engineering works within carbon removal. And I really like working with them. I've learned a lot from the people there. They're very smart, thoughtful people, and they're aiming to be the most developer-centric registry out there. What's cool about Rainbow is how seriously they take field engineering experience. They aren't there just to write a bunch of detached rules about how things should work in the abstract and then let project developers figure it out. No, they are very serious about field engineering, about how operations actually work in the real world, and they take a rigorous yet philosophical approach. I'll link to those articles in the show notes in the sponsors section. You should check them out because it will give you a very good idea of why I think Rainbow is a very cool company and one that you should consider doing business with. If you are a project developer and you're thinking about which registry to use for your next project, you should absolutely take a meeting with Rainbow and see if there's a fit there. One thing to keep in mind that is often very important to the project developers that I've interviewed as a result of my work with Rainbow, doing customer discovery work, and just trying to wrap my head around the opportunities that they're seeing is how fast their certification process is. They typically quote around 3 months to issue carbon credits, which is very short. It goes by lickety-split for registries. So if you're a project developer, you're looking for a registry to use to certify and issue your carbon credits, take a look at Rainbow. Link is in the show notes. Thanks so much for listening. I'd also love to tell you about Philip Lee LLP. I really like doing shows about the law. I think the law is such a fascinating part of our shared social life. It structures so much of it. It's badly understood by most people. And just structuring deals within carbon removal is hard. I'm talking grown-up deals here. Like when you're trying to put together an enormous package, complicated structuring, a lot of money changing hands, the stakes are high. You really do need a good lawyer. I'm sorry to tell you that if you are a startup out there in carbon removal, you're going to probably pay a fair amount of money to lawyers. There's just no way around it. Your choice is basically, do you get a bad lawyer or a good lawyer? One really cool thing I can say on Philip Lee LLP's behalf, well, one, Ryan Covington and I did a very fun show about how basically no one except for an elite few really know what bankability and project finance even mean. And he lays it out very clearly. If you'd like to go listen to that show, it's awesome and it's linked in the show notes. And also we ended up talking about Ernest Hemingway a fair amount too. So it keeps with the tradition of reversing climate change. One also really cool thing is that they just won Environmental Finance's VCM Law Firm of the Year. They've won it 3 years in a row, 2023, 2024, and 2025. It's the only award for legal teams operating in the VCM, and they have offices in the US, Europe, and the UK. You should check out Philip Lee LLP. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for listening to this. And thank you to our sponsors. You really make this so that it's something that in a busy life with lots of competing priorities, I'm able to keep coming back and making more reversing climate change. Thanks so much for what you do. And now, here is the show. Hey, thank you so much for listening to Reversing Climate Change. I'm Ross Kenyon. I'm the host of the show. I'm a longtime carbon removal entrepreneur. I'm going to do a quick introduction to the show today, get you right to the show. I don't think we need a long one because we explain what we're talking about in pretty decent detail here. Today's show is a nice introduction to regenerative economics. My guest is Eugene Kirpichov. Eugene started work on climate. It is one of the main online communities for people who are looking to leave their jobs outside of climate and find a way in. And it's in the middle of a big change right now. Eugene had a post on LinkedIn that caught my attention, and we had to do a show. I think this is a great place to start if you'd like to learn a little bit about regenerative economics, what all that means, is that possible? I detail some of the common criticisms that I hear. I would like to see a world that felt more regenerative. I would like to see a world that felt more cooperative. I would like to see a lot of the arms race dynamics and what has become a running joke on this show of the non-rivalrous game theoretic environments, which I can't believe I didn't say this on the show because I'm pretty sure I got that from Daniel Schmachtenberger years and years ago. And Eugene is on the show talking about how much Daniel Schmachtenberger has influenced him. In any case, I'll just let you get into it. Since I have you here, before I start the show, can you please open up your podcast app really quickly? Give the show 5 stars on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts. If you're also on Apple Podcasts, a quick review would also be great. Something as simple as, I really love this show. That would be much appreciated. There's also an option to give $5 a month and become a paid subscriber. It gets rid of all the ads that I don't read myself. And I think that's enough for now. Here's the show with Eugene. Thanks for being here, Eugene.
Thanks for having me, Russ.
I really liked your post talking about some of the emotional content of working on climate, watching the world move away from climate, and what it might take for us to collectively figure out what the hell we're all doing here. And I've been grappling with similar things. A friend of the show, Dave Addison, sent me your post and was like, you should have Eugene on. I take Dave's recommendations pretty seriously. Lo and behold, we are here. So I'm hoping for some spiritual coaching right now, Eugene. Can you lay out kind of your theory of what's happening and what is giving you hope to continue working in climate at this moment?
Yeah, Dave is a friend as well. I have a lot of respect for him, and I imagine that he would resonate with what that post says. Yeah, funny that you say spiritual coaching, because I think that the biggest unlock for me in being able to make sense of what is going on has been meditation. So I went on a 10-day silent Vipassana meditation course. It's one of those pretty hardcore ones where you can't read, you can't write, you can't talk to anyone or communicate in any way. Really, I was going there because I felt that I'm burning out, and I thought, let me, relax and recharge and reset. And it turned out to be a completely different thing. The difference between that versus the meditation most people think about is the difference between chamomile tea and an acid trip. So it was it's really a boot camp for nervous system is what it is. And you come out of it with a nervous system upgrade. The main gist of the upgrade is that you develop a much, much higher tolerance for uncomfortable feelings and emotions. For example, where previously my ability to think would stop somewhere in the territory of, oh my God, we're all going to die. Now I can think, and what then? What after that? Or and so what? It also is useful in many other contexts, just for making better decisions at work, for better regulating myself in life and so on. But it was definitely the unlock that enabled me to confront what we're actually dealing with in terms of our polycrisis and the breakdown of all the systems that our civilization depends on. So, Ross, sounds like you want to say something.
It sounds like one of the core lessons that you had here was that second part of, and so what, and then what, that kind of response to uncomfortable feelings. It wasn't just a dwelling in it. Was it just a piece that things are going to happen in a way that are unexpected, and just noting them and letting them pass on is the common advice for meditating, having intrusive, catastrophic thinking, or even just any thinking at all. Is it kind of like that, or am I misunderstanding?
Kind of. So let me try to, narrate what actually happened.
Yeah, tell me.
What happened next? So about maybe a year and a half ago, I came across this podcast by Daniel Schmachtenberger. It was a podcast about the Polycrisis. Yeah, I think he has a reputation.
I met him at a conference years ago and ended up hanging out with him for a couple of days. Very interesting guy. Freaked me out as well. I understand.
Yeah. So I was listening to that podcast, and before that, I didn't know what the Polycrisis was, or I thought that this is something that, particularly weird people think about, but we practical people, we build climate solutions. That's what I thought. And so he starts talking about it and says that the Polycrisis is basically the combination of the crisis we're dealing with, the climate crisis, biodiversity loss, inequality rising to a level that normally causes civil wars, breakdown of global collaboration, AI risks, nuclear risks. And the thing is that we're not nearly on track to solve any one of these things, and any one of them can end civilization in the current form. And so, what the hell do you do? Obviously, we don't have a hope of addressing all of them one by one if we can't even address one of them one by one. And so that's the bad news. The good news, he further goes, is that this is the same crisis. That this is all one crisis of our lack of ability, that basically a crisis of the fact that our economy and society lack the fundamental ability to keep themselves healthy. and they suffer from what's called tragedies of the commons, or another name for this is prisoners' dilemmas, or arms races. Daniel calls it multipolar traps. So all of them, all of the components of the Polycrisis have this to them, like the pivot of OpenAI and others from, make the best AI for humanity to make the biggest AI possible in the fastest time is an instance of this. The fact that no organization or no nation wants to be the first one to actually give up fossil fuels is also an instance of this. Like, what if you give up and the other guy doesn't, and now you're the sucker? So all of these crises look like that. And so as I was listening to this, I was like, oh shit, the guy has a point. While previously, I think that the gravity of the point would probably have prevented me from acknowledging that he is making a good point. I think for many people, when they start thinking about something this bad, they either it goes in one ear and out the other, because it's just too tragic to think about, too complex, or maybe they start actively denying it. No, technology is totally gonna save us. Like, what are you talking about? Or like some other form of deflection. But I think with a certain level of either self-regulation or being used to it, you are able to say, like, yes, this is actually the case. And the implications of this are that there probably will be a complete collapse before things get better. So it took me a while to accept that implication. So for some time I was just freaking out, and I got far enough to accept that the problem is this big and this complex, and that its roots lie this deep. But I didn't know how to make sense of that yet. So at that point, all I knew is that my organization needs to be doing something different, or I need to be running a different organization. Because so my nonprofit work on climate, we have a reputation for helping people find climate jobs, and helping people find climate jobs isn't going to do anything about this. Like, you can't really solve this type of problem, this gravity of problem, by getting people into existing job openings. That's just the wrong tool. Like, an analogy I like to give is that, like, you can't make a rabbit fly by throwing it into the air. It's possible to overcome gravity, but like, you can't overcome gravity by throwing a rabbit into the air. Maybe if you help the rabbit grow wings, yes, but
you're an engineer. Just figure it out, man.
It can be figured out, but you got to be figuring the right thing out. You can't just be figuring out, how do I throw the rabbit harder? So
the world moves fast. Your workday, even faster. Pitching products, drafting reports, analyzing data. Microsoft 365 Copilot is your AI assistant for work. Built into Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and other Microsoft 365 apps you use. Helping you quickly write, analyze, create, and summarize. So you can cut through clutter and clear a path to your best work. Learn more at Microsoft.com/M365 Copilot.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. Stop waiting around for the perfect candidate. Instead, use Indeed sponsored jobs to find the right people with the right skills fast. It's a simple way to make sure your listing is the first candidates see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs have 4 times more applicants than non-sponsored jobs. So go build your dream team today with Indeed. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
So what's going to happen with work on climate? Is that changing right now? It's such a huge institution in climate tech.
It's definitely changing. So what happened next was I shared my concerns with my colleagues and my board, and they're like, "Oh yeah, it is actually quite bad." And indeed, the concerns that we can't go far enough by getting people into jobs are very valid. Let's figure it out. So then I think, first of all, we realized that if we want to create systemic change, and it was obvious that the only way out of this is systemic change. It's not acceleration of implementation. It is systemic change. What I mean by systemic change is changing the dynamics of the system, like what causes what and what happens as a result, rather than just specific technologies. So if we're going to create systemic change, you can't create it by getting people into jobs, but you can create it by having people become leaders. So by having people create change where they are and having people do that in coordination. If you take any book about how to actually do systemic change in practice, there are very few such books, but they exist. Like one is called Impact Networks by David Ehrlichman, another is called Systemic Systems Thinking for Social Change by a different David Petterstraw. And all of these books say that
methodologies too, like where people always say to start with too, the thinking in systems.
Mm-hmm.
You read that?
Thinking in systems is a great start for understanding that systemic change is needed and like what it actually is and what are systems. Yeah, so all of those books say that if you want to create systemic change, you need to like get some people together who care about the issue you're looking at and identify what are some high leverage points where you can push, and then start pushing and keep pushing. So push at all leverage points at the same time. So that requires leadership rather than getting people into jobs. So that prompted the reframe of work on climate from helping people find climate jobs to helping people develop into climate leaders. And then once we help people develop into climate leaders, the kind that change practices at their organization, get involved in policy-making efforts in their sector, go and start climate tracks at industry conferences in their sector, convene and mobilize their peers who have more power to do the things that only their peers are capable of, and so on. So that's leadership. Now that's what we now aspire to do. And then once you do that, you can have people act in coordination. For example, if you get a bunch of, let's say that you want to do something about the food waste problem. So it's one thing if you just like get this person and that person to change some practices at their workplace to waste less food. And it's a completely different matter if you get together a group of people who, let's say, work at food processors and growers, packagers, marketers, regulators, distributors, and so on, and have them like align on a shared vision of a zero waste regenerative food system. And then you help them keep pushing, keep moving their organizations in that direction and collaborating in ways that would not have been possible individually. So that's how you can create systemic change. And so that's the next stage for work on climate, is having people engage in coordinated action. But I digress. So that was one reframe. That was a reframe from finding climate jobs to using your power as a professional, like your skills, your influence, your understanding of the industry. The second reframe was when around the time I came across the concept of regenerative economics. And it was actually very funny. We were finalizing our rewritten mission statement at Work on Climate. And then my board, it was talking about solving climate change still, and about like mobilizing professionals to use their power for it. And then my board chair, Jeremy, says, like, I like it. But like, what about biodiversity? What about conservation? They seem really interconnected. And I thought, oh, Jeremy like always has something to say, but you have a point. And I thought, I wonder if this is what he's talking about. I wonder if that is what is called that regenerative economy. So I looked up the paper about regenerative economics by John Fullerton and was like, oh, that's it. That's what I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life. And yes, it is a little bit woo-woo. People who talk about it sometimes talk in in language that practical people normally don't talk in. And it seems strange, but the core of it is so right that I'm going to dedicate the rest of my life to figure out how to put it into practice and get rid of the woo-woo and make it actually work. So it was a very profound and spiritual experience for me. Yes, go ahead, Ross.
Yeah. I'm so happy to hear all of that.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's okay to be a little woo. I've also come from a very practical background in lots of ways and been like, oh no, climate requires everything to be profitable and we can't have any green premiums and all these things that are very hard-nosed or like microeconomic thinking that I think it's okay. I think trying to cut all the woo out of this has made it so that it's basically only people in suits who make press releases who are able to do anything in climate to some extent. And I don't think it's going to work to do the systems change necessary that is likely just needed at this point. I'm sorry to report. We probably need some woo in there. So I'm giving you permission to keep some amount of woo. We need it, I think.
Thanks, Ross. I appreciate the permission. And I think overall, one of the principles of regenerative economics is it's called abundance at the edges. It is recognizing that innovation and progress and something really new happens at the intersection between two very different ecosystems or groups. And I think in this case, it means that the suits need to hang with the woo people, and neither of them can do it on their own.
Where did that happen? Are you trying to get this to happen in the right kind of way? Because they could also drive each other absolutely nuts. And also both groups of those people have driven me nuts at various times in my career as well. Sometimes when I'm around the suits, I represent a little more woo. When I'm with the woo, sometimes I'm a little more suit. But I feel like too much of that can also, it isn't always a productive friction. How do you make that a productive friction?
Yeah, very good question. So I'm talking both about like the idea of getting people with different mindsets into the same room, but also about the idea of outsiders. So like woo people. So some of my favorite people in the regenerative economic space are people who used to be suits.
Like John Fullerton, for instance.
Yeah, John Fullerton. Yeah, John Fullerton is a great example. Or, Samantha Power, she had a long career in international development finance, like doing it the conventional way at the World Bank. And then was like, this doesn't work at all. It doesn't do anything. This is completely the wrong way to distribute funding and heal communities. And now she is heading the BioFi project and developing regenerative financial vehicles that can allow money to flow in a community, not in a top-down way, but like in a way that nutrients flow in the Amazon rainforest, or the way that blood flows in our body and carries nutrients to everywhere they're needed and maintaining the system's health. So a lot of people like that.
Wow. Okay. What a beautiful vision. It's so fascinating to see work on climate change. I also, correct me if I'm wrong, work on climate grew out of COVID. People are at home. They're on their computers a lot. Climate is in a hype cycle that's very nice during this time. It's a good time to be working in climate. People want to pivot. It no longer feels that way basically at all. I think we're all watching the way the world is changing with some amount of horror and trepidation about how bad it's likely to get. It doesn't seem like it's going well. Work on climate is now changing, though, because it came out of that moment. It no longer fits the purpose. And also the problem that you thought you were solving was just too small. Like, it actually needs to be a much bigger mission.
Yep.
But this is also the problem with holistic thinking, too. The common criticism of systems thinking people is that they just say everything is contextual, and you never actually have to have a finite point that can be testable. It's kind of like so holistic that it's not reproducible in any way. It's very flim-flam. Work on climate could face organizationally a similar kind of problem here too. We're trying to tackle the polycrisis, and the polycrisis is nearly everything. How do you have an organization that's effective, that the mission is literally that big?
Yeah, very good question, which I think goes to the conversation about overall theory of change. Like, how do we get from this economic system to a completely different economic system? So I think it is useful to remind ourselves what regenerative economics actually is, and that's going to give us some clues about how to get there. Okay. So I like framing it in one of three ways. One way to frame it, which resonates with particularly hard-nosed practical people, is that it's an economy that doesn't have tragedies of the commons. Like, everyone can see that we have tragedies of the commons. Even the biggest, most obtuse technocrat will say that they exist, and they will all say that it would be nicer if they didn't. It just so happens that in order to not have tragedies of the commons, you need to build a regenerative economic system, which is completely different. But anyway, that's the framing. Second framing is that it's an economy where all activity strengthens the health of the systems that it depends on. For example, the business activities of a company strengthen the well-being of the people that the company needs to operate, and the people that the company needs to be its customers, and strengthens the natural ecosystems and supply chains that it needs in order to do its thing. And as a government, operates, it strengthens the health of the nation, and so on. So this is a rather vague framing, but I think it portrays an inspiring vision. Like, imagine if we weren't confined to simply hoping to destroy our foundations a little bit less, and if instead the economy was actually positive. Like, the more the economy does, the healthier everything gets. Wouldn't that be nice?
Yes, I agree. That sounds delightful.
Yeah, it really would be nice. But this begs the question, like, how the hell do you do it? Is it even possible? So the third framing shows that it is possible. The third framing calls upon us to realize that all the living systems around us are actually economies, and they have a lot to teach us about how to do it. So, for example, the cells in my body exchange resources with each other and exchange signals with each other. That's an economy, right? That's an economy. Likewise, a rainforest the animals and bacteria and plants and so on also exchange resources and signals with each other. That's also an economy. And these economies have been extraordinarily successful at persisting for a long time and getting better over time. Like there are 50 million year old rainforests out there, to my knowledge. So I don't think that even Elon Musk can say that our civilization will have that kind of track record of health over the long time, right? So the suggestion here is to be like, I wonder how they do that. Like, I wonder what are the principles that allow natural systems to be like that, like allow them to operate in a way where like everyone's needs are, met in a way that strengthens the health of the whole. How do they do that? And then can we borrow some of those principles and incorporate them into the way that we run the economy? I want to be very clear that the proposal is not to destroy our economy and go back to nature. That is a completely different proposal. The proposal is to observe, like, I wonder how they do that. And is there something we can learn from that? Is there something we can transfer into the way that our economy runs? So that the regenerative economy is the idea of borrowing enough of those principles to make our economy regenerative and make it so that all the cool stuff that we have here, like all our, AI and genetic engineering and infrastructure and internet and so on, so that all of that stuff actually causes the economy to make everything healthier over time. So that's the idea.
Wow. It's interesting to me that people associate regenerative economics with a sort of back to the land, small is beautiful aesthetic, because I think of biomimicry, but I also think of increasing complexity of our social lives that are intertwined, not a reduction of complexity where we're retreating to smaller communities. I don't think of regenerative economics as necessarily a going back in time, back to the land kind of movement. Do people often levy that criticism against it? Because it sounds like they haven't read it very closely. If so, that seems like a poor criticism.
Yeah, I think that indeed a lot of people perceive it that way. I think a lot of people perceive it as something too abstract to even know what the hell it is about.
I think that's a more serious risk for the paradigm than anything.
It's a serious risk, yeah. But this is the vision that is alive in my head. And I haven't really met a lot of people who say no, that's the wrong vision. We must go back to the land and not have anything else. I think there are some people who say that, but when you talk to them, actually they're like, oh, it's a broader vision is nice too.
I also think of someone like Charles Eisenstein. I imagine you probably like his work too, right?
We don't know him.
Oh, you don't? Okay. He wrote a book called The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible, which is a very woo name for a book about societal transformation. But I kind of love it. It's one of those things where, in the same way in your own heart, when you were hearing about these ideas about the Polycrisis, they were overwhelming and you wanted to just reject it or say, I'm just focused on my own lane and climate. And then opening yourself up to, it really is this big, it really is this threatening. What do I do about it? I think even saying the name of that book out loud, my heart does call out for it. The world does not have to be lived at everyone else's expense. It does not have to be cruel by design. We do not have to have people dying of preventable illnesses. We do not need to be at each other's throats fighting over resources. We don't actually have to be living this way. It's a terrible thing. And it's scary to say that out loud because it sounds very naive, but also we don't have to behave this way. We can change systems and we don't have to live immiserating one another.
Yeah, my response to that is, well, first of all, hell yes. Second of all, I see myself as a very cynical and no bullshit person. I'm really allergic to actual woo-woo that doesn't have substance behind it. I'm really allergic to naivete. I'm allergic to when I see that somebody is proposing something that cannot possibly work, but it feels good, so they propose it, or their paycheck depends on it, so they propose it. I hate that shit. And that is the very reason why I am putting my life to putting regenerative economics into being, because everything else, it can't possibly work. I just can't say with a straight face that a different approach can work. And this is because this concept of regenerative economics, it is not a specific vision, here's how you run the economy. It is a property that the economy must have. It is a property that it increases the health of its systems. And if you don't have that property, by definition, you degrade the health of your system. So one day they're going to collapse and you don't have an economy. There is simply no alternative. So it is kind of obviously the right vision. The question is, how do you do that, and like what does it look like, and how do you get there? Which brings me back to our conversation about how do you get there, and what's that got to do with work on climate. So let's ask ourselves, how did natural systems get here? There was a time when we didn't have the Amazon rainforest, and it hasn't been around for 50 million years. And there was a time when we didn't even have animals. So all we had was a soup of chemicals. And then we eventually had a soup of amino acids, and then we had a soup of RNA chains, and then we had a soup of single cells, which turned out to be very successful because they knew how to self-replicate. And so we had bacteria and stuff. And then, obviously we didn't get to the Amazon rainforest by some bacteria outcompeting others and like becoming the biggest, baddest bacteria. Like the elephant, it's not a really big bacteria. It's an entirely different category of thing. So we got from...
What a sentence that is, by the way. I don't think that sentence has ever been said before, but okay.
Well, I hope it's vivid enough to stay in people's minds. So the way it actually happened was after single-celled organisms appeared, and then it turned out that when they collaborate and start forming multi-cell organisms, that's even better. And when those form animals, that's also even better, and form humans. And now, humans have formed our own ecosystem, the economy. So that's actually has been pretty cool for a while, the way that we have run the economy. So the thing is that this was a sequence of increasingly complex high-level organization into networks. There was competition, yes, but the really big phase changes happened when the level of organization increased. And the same thing, so our economy is today is more like that primordial soup of bacteria. And we have a bunch of neoliberal spokespeople saying that the next step is bigger bacteria. But the next step is not bigger bacteria. The next step is the elephant. So the next step is more high-level organization of entities, people and organizations and resources in the economy into higher-level entities. And this probably sounds very abstract. So what I mean by that, these things already exist. Like the C Corporation is an example of that organization. The nation state is another example. They're just not very healthy yet. They're not nearly as healthy as an elephant or as a natural ecosystem like the rainforest. But I am talking about things like forms of ownership, forms of governance, forms of incorporation, forms of collaboration, and so on and so on. So types of financing stacks, types of legal agreements. So like the glue, the types of structures that hold the economy together and cause parts to behave as a larger whole. That's all it is. And there's many forms of that in the economy, but we need better forms, better and healthier and higher level forms. So basically, I think that the path from here to there lies in innovation on that. Innovation on technologies is basically like innovation on bigger and better bacteria. And like it's not bad. We do need to develop new types of cells. Like, for example, in order to create a human, at some point the brain cell needed to evolve. At some point, like the cells of my eye needed to evolve. So there is a role for change at the level of cell capabilities. But what's really needed is change at the level of how the economy is glued together and wired together. So that means innovation on what I call either network vehicles, or you can call it economic architecture patterns. So innovation on that. And the connection to work on climate is, I see it like this. I see it as, so we're facing the task of making each sector of the economy regenerative, and it's actually bigger than making each sector regenerative, but for the sake of the argument. And then I think that as we form networks of professionals who want to make their sector regenerative, first they act individually as leaders. Second, they act in coordination and learn to create change together at all. And then these networks that we form, then they can become, the hardware or the substrate for people to do this kind of innovative ways of organizing together. So, for example, if you have a network of people in the Bay Area food system who really want to be regenerative, at some point, this may be the right network on which to build a new governance body for California's water resources. Or at some point, this may be the right network on which to build, a really large demand pre-commitment for regenerative agriculture, or something else of that sort, or like a new ownership model for, farm equipment needed to do regenerative agriculture, and so on. So this is what I'm talking about. So the path is individual leadership, collective leadership, and then regenerative collective leadership. I am on some level talking out of my behind because we're a few years away from even trying that. But when the efforts I see that I think are actually making the biggest difference towards the regenerative economic system today are efforts that develop that kind of stuff. It's the likes of the BioFi project, which is developing those financial vehicles, and like TIF's transformational investment in food systems, and like the Bloom Network, which is a community of practice for communities everywhere that are attempting to implement regenerative economies where they are, and the Terra Nova Foundation, and so on. So they all are developing like new structures, new forms of ownership, new forms of collaboration, new types of learning communities that kind of spread the DNA of what works regeneratively in one place to another place, and so on.
So many different things to ask about. One thing I was thinking about, and I was actually just talking to Dave about this, is that I remember reading John Stuart Mill years and years ago, and he spends a fair amount of time in On Liberty talking about cooperatives. Cooperatives are going to be a main economic institution of the future. And as you noted earlier, it's like mostly C Corps, LLCs and C Corps everywhere. Like, why are cooperatives not more popular? You would think that worker ownership would be a model that would be beloved by all. I could see both right and left finding their own reasons for enjoying such a thing. They're pretty rare, though. Like, there are big ones like Mondragon in Spain is really big. There's various agricultural ones. But overall, it's like pretty small. And then even where they do exist, like Seattle, where I am, PCC is a big cooperative grocery chain, but it chronically has issues where it just like does not function as neatly as Kroger or the conventional corporate approach to agribusiness and food systems, despite people really wanting it to. It's more expensive, and yet it's pretty crowded whenever I get in there. And so people are there because they care about it, and yet it's chronically in trouble. Why is it that models like cooperatives cannot just get ahead? Like, what's wrong with them that's preventing them from being more dominant than more profit-seeking, top-down types of structures?
I don't know. But I think the task ahead of us is to make them better. So it just so happens that indeed right now, the likes of the traditional C corporation and like private equity firms and the Exxons and the Bayers and Monsantos of the world are currently more revolutionarily fit. And yes, they're winning in some sense temporarily. They're winning in the same sense that the cancer is winning as it takes over the body. So yes, they're successful at killing the other stuff, but unfortunately they're not successful at keeping the foundations that they depend on healthy. So sooner or later they will collapse. This is simply inevitable, which I guess brings us back to one of the points we were making earlier. So I want to make several points from here. So one point is that I think it means that as we figure out how do we create new regenerative structures in the economy, it is incredibly important, like vitally important, that we don't just ask ourselves, like, what is good? Like, how do I run a good cooperative? But we ask ourselves a different question. How do I run a good cooperative that wins in a fight to death with an extractive cooperative? Because the extractive cooperative, like, it's on a mission to kill you. It's it's on a mission to take market share. And like people there are thinking, how do we kill this cooperative and take its market share? That's literally what they're thinking. They're maybe phrasing it in corporate words, but that's what they're thinking. And they're very good at it. And so we must ask this question: how do we win in a fight to death with the incumbent system? And we must also ask ourselves the question: how do we not become what we seek to defeat? So there is no shortage of examples of, for example, climate startups that are then, some kind of carbon removal startup that then Shell buys it and now uses its carbon removal to extract more fossil fuels by injecting carbon into fossil fuel reservoirs, right? Or maybe some regenerative agriculture startup that gets an offer that it cannot refuse from Monsanto, and now it's doing the thing that Monsanto wants it to do. So we must build structures that are resistant to corruption and co-option as well. And these are very hard problems, and we haven't solved them, which is why we don't yet have cooperatives taking over everything. We simply haven't evolved far enough, but we need to evolve further. Otherwise, we're going to collapse. And honestly, I think we are going to collapse. But hopefully, we are going to collapse once and not 10 times. So on that point, back to our conversation about like what gives me hope, and when we're facing all of this collapse, another thing that I think like an increased degree of self-regulation and acceptance and equanimity has helped me accept is that I don't think that there is a way to, I don't think that we will like solve all of these crises before the big one hits in some sense. Like I think that something truly catastrophic is going to happen to the economy, let's say in the next 50 years. And I think that it's going to take a lot longer than that to develop a fully regenerative economy, just because of the time that cycles of change take. Maybe I'm wrong. I would love to be wrong, but we can't count on that. So the question is then, like, if I believe that, what is my hope in, and how do I stay grounded? So, like, honestly, this isn't the first time in the history of life, or even in the history of humanity, when something collapsed. Like, it's us kind of privileged white communities who are not used to that, but lots of indigenous nations have been almost completely obliterated. And then, they came back from that. Maybe that happened many times. Maybe they're still not in a great state, but like, it's pretty normal. Many species of animals, many natural ecosystems have been destroyed. And then, life goes on. So the vision in my head is that, yes, it's going to collapse. And then something healthy will grow from the ashes. Maybe something unhealthy will grow and it will collapse again. And then the third thing will grow. So sooner or later, by definition, sooner or later, we are going to have a regenerative economy because it's the only thing that's going to be stable. But I personally would like it, I would like it to happen sooner, which we have the power to make it happen sooner, because unlike natural evolution, we don't just have to rely on selection and things failing. We can direct it intentionally. So we can make it happen sooner, even if I'm not confident that we can make it happen before the first collapse. So I think that's kind of my take on this.
Wow. That kind of deep time perspective, it's not quite deep time, it's somewhere before that, but it's not far off, is pacifying to me. I feel calm as a result of thinking like, okay, it may not be this current incarnation of humans, but potentially we reduce to a lower level of complexity and then learn better of past mistakes and figure it out. Alternatively, though, we have plenty of culture that has players in video games that are in the midst of cultures that once rise and fallen, and now we're in their ruins. We don't really understand why they passed away. Like the Elder Scrolls mythology is very much of this ilk. You're like, what happened to the dwarves? I don't know. They were technologically very advanced. Something really bad happened to them. We'll figure it out later. I feel like that kind of mythological message is very present in our culture. I suspect it would probably continue. It's also like A Canticle for Leibowitz. Have you ever read that?
I have not read that one, no.
Yeah, very similar too, of humans living in the shell of the former civilization. And also just Western civilization for a long time was that with Rome. Like once Rome was gone, it reduced to a much lower level of complexity. And that is something that we are used to doing, and things will get better. Now, this is more like, what was that great die-off that happened where all humans are descended from like 100 humans that somehow survived a disaster in Africa like millions of years ago? Like we passed through an evolutionary gate that's like this narrow. And like humans almost, it's like we're all descended from not even that many like proto-humans. So whatever, we'll probably figure it out and it will be okay. And that's relaxing to me.
Yeah.
But crap, I'm thinking about a lot about my own life, and pretty much all you can control, as far as I can tell, is your own behavior, your own reactions, how you treat one another. And I remember talking to Daniel Schmachtenberger about this. We were at this we were at a castle in France for like a couple of days, and I got to spend a lot of time hanging out with him. Very obsessed with the prisoner's dilemma, very obsessed with what do we do given that defection is so likely for so many people. Like it's always easier to cheat and then take the thing for yourself. We're in an arms race dynamic too. We're like, okay, if Sam Altman decides that AGI is not really the thing that they care about anymore, there's probably 20 other organizations that are racing for AGI. Like someone is going to do it. Yeah. So like, then what? Then what do we do? And like with Daniel, the only thing that I could kind of come to was a sort of thoroughgoing Christian, pacifistic, turn the other cheek. Like we need people who are spiritually evolved enough to be thoroughly nonviolent, thoroughly humane, and to be that even at great personal cost, because we need to change that prisoner's dilemma dynamic and try to find ways to do that. And I can't remember if he liked that idea. I suspect he probably thought that we needed something that had a tighter logic to it, a tighter economic logic, to make sure it wasn't just dependent upon great spiritual strength. And it sounds like maybe you're heading in that direction too, where this is not really a spiritual thing for you. This meditation, there's a spiritual component to it, but it shouldn't require self-sacrifice to the extent that I'm describing in order to pull this off, or we didn't figure it out. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So I think one of the philosophies that some people hold about how we're going to get there is, you ask people, what is a plausible path to getting there? And then they answer a different question is what they would like to happen in order for that to happen. And they say a mass scale cultural transformation is needed. Yes, it's needed, but it's not plausible. So I'm sorry, you're not answering the question. It's because honestly, most people don't have an answer to that question, and that's okay. I have an answer that I think that is credible enough to me, but it is also not without major gaps. So I think that culture and economy and policy are mutually shaping, so none of them is primary. The thing that is primary is structure. So there is an insight by Donella Meadows that I really like, which says that the behavior of a complex system is determined not by its parts, but by how they're connected to each other. So that is a very crucial insight. It means really that the thing that matters is a topology of the system rather than its technology, so to speak. And what that means in terms of a path to a regenerative economy, again, I think it mirrors the path that life took, where we need to develop new forms of healthy organizations and collaborations, ownership, financing stacks, and so on, that, start small, but they're so good at replicating and so good at fighting and staying alive that they basically eat the current systems from within and successfully survive and outcompete them. Either they actually kill them, or maybe the current systems kill themselves and these things don't die. Or maybe they, enter a symbiosis with current systems through which they are transformed. I don't know exactly what form that may look like. I suppose, imagine AI, for the sake of the argument, the AI ecosystem. So I don't think that we're going to address AI risks by yelling harder at Sam Altman. And I don't think that we're going to address it by having some new ethical AI startup outcompete OpenAI either. But I think what might instead happen is perhaps some kind of new grassroots open source infrastructure for managing data that AI is used to train peers, some kind of collective form of ownership and governance of that. And for some reason, for some reasons maybe similar to the reasons why the open source movement succeeded, it turns out to be so successful, but basically OpenAI either has to comply with it and follow its rules, or it gets cut off from a really important market share. Something like that. So that would be an example of a system growing in power from the bottom up and forcing an existing system to transform. And, some systems will rather die than transform, and that's okay. They die, good riddance. But maybe not. The point is that a healthy thing grows big.
Okay. Is the point then that some of these cultural or spiritual changes, like the example that I gave, are they not relevant, or that they're so entwined with politics and other things that it's possible that they do have some impact, or maybe that they encourage some people to make structural changes about the kinds of companies or organizations that they start, something like that? Or is it just a waste of time to even think about spiritual matters?
No, it's not a waste of time to think about it. But I believe that people's spiritual inclinations are shaped not so much by somebody trying to teach them a different spiritual inclination, and they're more shaped to a larger extent by the systems that they're part of. For example, if you are a big company executive, you're shaped every day by talking to your board and to your investors and to your employees who want your stock to grow, otherwise their net worth will shrink, and so on and so on. So you're shaped by those systems every day, and by watching your peers who behave a certain way succeed and your peers who behave a certain other way fail. So the economy is shaping our spiritual faculties. And likewise, our spiritual faculties are also shaping the economy, and our economy is shaping policy by virtue of the successful players in the economy buying politicians. And it happens the other way around as well. So these things are interconnected. none of them is primary. Any of them is like a sufficiently useful lever, but I think structure is an even more useful lever. But I think the thing is that, like, as we think about this, we should make sure that our work is not erased by the forces of the system. For example, let's say that you do some kind of spiritual transformation work with a cohort of business school students, and then they go to McKinsey because that's where the jobs are, and not much is going to be left of your spiritual transformation work by the time they're done. Like you will be lucky if something is left, and maybe it's not completely worthless, but a lot of it will be erased, and that's because they will be taught to operate in a certain model, and every day they will be changed in a direction that's opposite from what you taught them. So we should be conscious of the limits of education.
I think the cultural pressures of one's work discipline are hard to overstate. They're invisible to most of us because they just make up the cultural environment in which you operate on a daily basis. But what was that statement I said earlier about the more beautiful world we know in our hearts is possible, or whatever? He said, if he said that kind of shit at McKinsey, I think they would be like, you are not a cool person anymore. Like, you are in trouble. You are not reliable. You are not a serious person. Like, just try saying something that is about the Polycrisis in a meeting where you're like, I'm glad your organization was tolerant of it. But I could also imagine your board member saying that in some groups. It's just like, stay in our lane. Like, we only need to do one thing. And like, why even bring this up? We can't even solve one problem well. Now we have to solve 3 problems simultaneously. Like, some of that stuff just looks inherently less serious to organizations that are more conventional. So the amount of cultural pressure there is to conform to what is deemed to be practical, even in like sustainable ESG oriented fields. I put out a show recently about what it's like trying to sell to emissive companies and having to potentially celebrate their achievements in public, even when they're relatively small and do not account for all of their emissions, and they are still continuing to do not so nice things. But you kind of have to clap for them all the same. Be like, thank you so much, X company, for your great leadership on carbon removal. Or you're like, but privately, people are like, yeah, this company sucks. Like, we would be better off if this company didn't exist at all. But you have to say it. You got to say the thing.
Yeah, both can be true. Like, maybe we would be happier if this company didn't exist at all. But it's also good that they made some progress here. Like, I don't know, no humans are perfect either. And I think that I don't really know how to say this without sounding like a walking cliche. But I think that this does hold water. So as long as they're being, authentic, why not applaud them if they're doing it for the right reason rather than for the reason of just greenwashing?
Which it's really hard to know.
Yeah.
I'm sure the people who work in those departments are there for the right reasons and care about it. But I think the company overall is like, they've determined that this prepares them for a pre-compliance moment, that they're going to be ahead of their competition because they already have all the connections to all of the relevant companies that will develop projects for them. It's like, there's always a practical logic to these decisions. It's never just, let's give away our money because it would be super nice to do. It's like, oh, this would help us with brand equity or something.
Yeah, though, I want to bring up something else. I recently read this long philosophical essay about the philosophy of the likes of Peter Thiel and Elon Musk and J.D. Vance and Curtis Yarvin and so on. And the striking thing to me was this. So I am used to thinking of these people as simply corrupt and arrogant, like that they simply want more money, and that's why and more power, and that's why they're acting the way they do. I'm not an expert in their psychology. I'm just conveying like what I get the sense might actually be the case, potentially based on reading that. So it seems like it might be that they're honestly pursuing a vision of a better world, rooted in a different understanding of what a better world is. Just because they spent their whole life building machines and companies that make machines and function like machines, they think that the better world is a machine. And that brings them to philosophy of this guy, Curtis Yarvin, that basically everything is a corporate state managed by a CEO. But there are some interesting parallels there. Like, there are some things that I don't disagree with. So, for example, even apparently the philosophy of this guy, Curtis Yarvin, is like he proposes to have a large network of interconnected sovereign corporate states. Like, I'm on board with the interconnected sovereign part. I'm just not on board with the part about corporate states. And like the reason that he is for corporate states, it's not that he thinks that slavery, corporate slavery is good and nothing to worry about. It's more that because he thinks it won't happen. I think he's mistaken in that. But I guess my point is that there is some ray of hope in the fact that some of the most powerful people in the world are not actually purely motivated by money. Like they may actually be motivated by a perverse vision of what good is. And by, I also find in those philosophies that they actually do share some of my understanding of the role of existential risk, that like ultimately it is about long-term survival of the civilization, even if there's going to be a collapse on the way. Like, hey, I'm on board with that part too. I just completely disagree with you about what a long-term thriving civilization looks like and how to get there. But like if we share that goal, like who knows, maybe one day you will realize that your way doesn't work and maybe you'll start building a regenerative economy. Yeah, I don't know how far I want to take this line of reasoning, but I think the core point is that there is maybe some hope that powerful people could change their mind or could be allies on some components of what we want to do.
I think it makes sense to treat them as acting in good faith. I think there are some people who are at the heights of wealth and corporate success that care about winning, and their ideology is basically just that they like winning and being the best at things. But I think for those who are ideologically motivated, I think there's a concept from Platonic philosophy called akrasia, and Socrates is asking, like, how could anyone choose a bad thing if the good thing is right there beside it? Everyone would obviously choose the good thing, right? And obviously the answer to this is that they misjudge or differently judge what is good. And even like Peele's Antichrist lectures that he's been giving recently that identifies Greta as a great threat and a candidate to be the Christian Antichrist is there because she prevents the technology from saving us from our own problems that we've created through technology and development. It's not just like evil for evil's sake. It's a different interpretation of reality that I think is off, but it's not just evil for evil's sake. And I think sometimes people forget. And even like with Trump, I think Trump likes to win and still wants to be liked. And even some of the Elon's most pathetic stuff that is very mockable and sad, like him playing video games where everyone's like messaging him about Grimes, like Grimes never loved you or whatever. You can like see it affecting him. Like he like wants to be liked by people and thought of as a cool, smart person. Like it's very, very much like a Star Wars, like Darth Vader still got some good in him. I think most people, even like people that we have grown to distrust and find what they're doing to be quite terrible, I like to think there is some hope for them. There's still some heart left in there. I think we do a disservice when we treat people as choosing evil for evil's sake. I don't know that that's as common as we might think. And maybe that's a good place to wrap on. Oh yeah, have the last word on it.
Yeah, and I think like, at least for myself, I didn't think that they're choosing evil for evil's sake. I thought they're choosing evil because it benefits them. Because they want to feel like a savior or something like that. But what I didn't realize that there might be actually a philosophy, even a philosophy I don't agree with behind it.
Yeah, you got to go read some Rene Girard and some of the other people that they like. And for next time, we'll talk critical theory and all of that stuff. Yeah. Eugene, thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate your work.
Yeah, thanks, Russ. This was great.